The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people were evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. There's still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, a group would just jump in and help out. So it was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
Aloha everyone, I'm geologist Philip Ong, here with Mr. Dane DuPont of HawaiiTracker.com, bringing you guys another Hawaiian Volcano Tracker update. Today is Thursday, May 11th, 2023. How you doing today, Dane?
I'm doing good, doing good. How about yourself?
Doing alright. I'm still kind of waiting for any moment that this volcano might actually erupt. Seems like it's been flurrying higher, then kind of backing off, and then flurrying higher, then backing off, and so we're just still kind of waiting to see what happens here, and it's been a little touch and go in that sense, yeah, but not a whole lot changed, honestly, in the last week.
Yeah, whoever took those long options on the over-under we did a couple weeks ago, I think they've secured it at this point.
Yeah, that's over. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we will update how the pattern fits into the pre-eruption sequence, compare it to what happened earlier this year in 2023. Talk about the seismicity, which is really the main action happening right now. There is a little bit of extra media on the vibro-sized truck that's driving around Kilauea Summit and pounding around. So we'll look at that a little bit. Still quite on Mauna Loa, but that's what we'll touch base on today. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, we have a whole bunch of community things going on as well. So even though there's not, the eruption going on, we're kind of thankful a little bit because we're busy, especially for the past week. So we appreciate it holding off a little bit on that. I know we have no control of it, but that was kind of a nice little thing.
Yeah, I was just really hoping it was not going to erupt the same week as the anniversary, the 5-year anniversary that we had last week, because That would have been messy, I think. But here we are,
not ideal.
May 11th.
Yep.
Hasn't erupted yet, and I can get into the summary here if you're ready.
All right, let's do it.
All right. So this week's Hawaiian Volcano Summary. Here's a map of Kilauea Summit showing the earthquakes for the past week. So still a lot of activity there at Kilauea Summit. The earthquakes are colored by depth here, so those are all not quite as shallow as the red, but slightly deeper as that orange color you see on there. So quite a lot of earthquakes right around Kilauea Summit. If I zoom this map out, you'll see that it's fairly restricted to that summit area. Nothing on the East Rift. We do still have earthquakes down in Pahala at the source that's feeding the whole system from deep, deep down, and not directly connected as far as time-wise to surface activity here. So that's what the map looks like today. Here is our earthquakes for the last year. Earthquakes per week are shown here on the left, and the last year here on the right. So here we are at the right end of the graph. And if I zoom it in here, our current week is not quite complete. This thing resets on Sundays. So it looks like we're right around 400 earthquakes for this past week. We'll probably come up to close to this one, which was just under 500 earthquakes last week. You can see the weeks before that, we actually got up over, if I scroll it over here, the upper line is 800. So this one was 800 right here. That one was 600. This is including all the earthquakes in Kilauea Summit and Pahala region, just to make that clear. It's everything on that map we just showed you guys. But you can clearly see how it had been down here at a fairly low level as eruption was ongoing. The eruption ended. It stepped up to this elevated level here. And then about not quite a month ago, a little less than a month ago, it really stepped up a whole other gear here. And since then, it's come back down a little bit. But even these two levels of last week and this week are going to be higher than what we saw prior to that. So we are still elevated. This would have been maybe slightly elevated, so we're definitely in the elevated range in here. And just waiting to see what happens next. And for context, this trio of weeks over here was the build up to the 2023 January 5th eruption. So in that case, we had 3-4-ish weeks there of this elevated signals, right? So you can see, looking over here to the right, that we're more or less in that same time threshold here. It's been about 4 weeks-ish or so. So it seems like it could happen pretty much at any point in time. The USGS especially is stating that summit inflation is, quote, higher than conditions preceding that January 5th, 2023 summit eruption. And so that together with the earthquakes, we'll show you guys the inflation in our full update here. But the thing to keep in mind is in January 2023, the earthquakes came up in about an hour before the lava erupted out of the ground. So it really can ramp up pretty quickly, and it seems like that is the pattern that we're in here is kind of waiting for it to actually ramp up and do it at some point in time. And of course, it's got to pressurize enough underground for that to happen, and as the ground is adjusting and moving, it may delay it by creating more room underground before it actually can pressurize enough to pop at the top. So that's the earthquakes on Kilauea here. If we just quickly go to Mauna Loa, here is the last year of earthquakes on Mauna Loa, also per week. So this is our pre-eruption on Mauna Loa here. That very imminent, that late November imminent eruption. We had that build up back through October the previous year. And here we are now at the right side of this graph, right over here at very low earthquakes level as well. So nothing really happening in Mauna Loa. There was a slight little flurry that happened a couple weeks ago, but not much following up from that happening here. And that's the Hawaiian Volcano Summary for this week. We'll get into more of the details here in our full update, so I'll switch our view over to that. And I thought we would start today with looking at the earthquake map. So let me get this up on the screen here for you guys. Let's fix our caption and show you guys recent earthquakes here. So here's a whole island of Hawaii. There's our Kilauea cluster that we'll focus on the most today, right over here. We still have our Deep Pahala cluster happening over here. That's that feeder source as I mentioned before. So that's kind of our background. It's been normal for several years now, flaring off in that area. And all the other earthquakes here are essentially settling earthquakes. There is one right below Mauna Loa here. Mauna Loa summit at a depth of 10 kilometers or so. That's roughly 6-ish miles or so. So that's still adjustment of Mauna Loa summit. Not a whole lot of numerous events to cause any worry right over there. There was a big earthquake down here in Pahala this last week. I think it was, let's see what the USGS statement says here. Monday, May 8th, there was a statement. There was a 3.8 earthquake deep Pahala at a depth of 20 miles, 32 kilometers there. So that's just one highlight of the Pahala cluster going on over there. There was another USGS info statement that was unusual this past week. That was last week, Friday. And that was 4:26 p.m. Magnitude 3.0 earthquake occurred 22 miles east-northeast of Waimanalo Beach, Oahu, at a depth of 5 miles, 9 kilometers below sea level right there. So let's go back to our map. Let me zoom it out. We rarely go off island here, but scroll over, and there is that event right there. Oh, there we go. There it is right there. So there it is. Looks like revised 3.0 there. And that is, if we go back to the update here, what I generally term a settling earthquake. And so location suggests a source due to bending of the oceanic plate from the weight of the Hawaiian island chain, a common origin for earthquakes occurring away from the island of Hawaii. The event is not related to volcanic processes. So that is the background earthquake elsewhere apart from Kilauea here this last week. But back to our main event here on Kilauea. Let's zoom into the summit area. And I'm showing you guys here the whole last week, so similar to the last map we showed you guys. Now it's colored by time, so the yellows are within the last week, orange within the last day, and red within the last couple hours or so. So that's the pattern there. If I switch it over to just the last one day, to filter it a little bit, you can see how active the earthquakes actually are. 12 earthquakes in this area today, which is slightly elevated still. It's not a huge amount. I remember one day we loaded this thing up and it was at, I want to say 43 earthquakes in one day in this area that were coming up on this map. So we're still waiting for it to ramp up, and as I said before, that could happen fairly quickly. Doesn't seem to be yet quite now, but when we see the background levels flaring up like this, and it does show that the pressure is building underground, and we'll see that when we come to our monitoring signals here shortly. So that is the pattern of earthquakes there. If we go to the USGS update, right there from today, they've been issuing daily updates once again. Not a lot's been changing day to day, but they have been changing a little bit of their terminology and language here. So here, no active lava on the past day. It's not erupting, no active lava since March 7th. So now a full 2 months since the last lava on Kilauea summit. With a reminder that when we hit the 3-month threshold, the eruption will be officially over, I suppose, right? You know, that's kind of silly to say because it's been done for 2 months, but there is this clause where if it resumes in the same place within 3 months, then it's considered a resumption and not a new eruption. So that's why I throw that out there. So if it goes somewhere else in a shorter amount of time, then it's a new eruption as well. So we'll just wait and see what actually happens there, but that's just an interesting milestone to have passed here, 2 months since the last lava on the ground. No significant changes along either of the volcano's rift zones as well. So let's write in, right in here, summit observations. Slow, steady inflation continues. Overall, inflation at the summit of Kilauea is higher than conditions preceding the January 5th, 2023 summit eruption. Small flurries of earthquakes continue irregularly beneath Halema'uma'u, Kanakakoi crater, and the southern margin of Kaluapele since April 16th. So it's almost a full month of these elevated earthquake rates here. Rates of summit earthquakes remain elevated. Additional earthquake flurries are possible. The most recent sulfur dioxide emission rate was approximately 135 tons per day on May 3rd. So volcanically, this is a fairly low background number there, but as we've mentioned before, that's still enough to cause significant concerns for nearby communities. It would break the EPA regulations for industry. So volcanically, not a huge amount, but still impactful here for people around. Otherwise, not any activity that's unusual on the rift zones, as mentioned before there. So that's the update for today. It's similar to the rest of the ones this past week, so I'll just show you guys that one. Move on to showing you guys some more of these graphs. So starting off with our earthquakes over the last month, so now earthquakes per day, and 1 month at a time here in the bottom. So here we are at the right end of the graph. Yesterday we reached almost 120 earthquakes, right? Remember, this is a whole map including Pahala, so still, since it's capturing that whole same region consistently, this entire graph, we can still compare the relative values up and down. So high at 120, not quite as high as back on April 29th, where we actually were over 150 or so. but definitely higher than the previous part of the week here, where we're down around 80 or so earthquakes per day. Today, this bar is not the full width here, so our full day hasn't completed, and this thing will keep rising and growing as the day continues, and you'll probably reach some level, I would guess, somewhere in here-ish, similar to what we saw before yesterday as well. So it's not exactly as high as we saw that 3 and 4 weeks ago level up here, but it's definitely higher than what we saw 2 weeks ago this past week here in Kilauea. And comparing that 1 month period of time with our ground tilt at Kilauea summit, that's this blue line here. You can see that's pretty steady upwards the entire time here. Some little nuances. You see these cycles that look like deflation, inflation a little bit, but maybe some other interesting pulses coming through, because you don't quite see that exact deflation, inflation pattern. In fact, you don't see those cycles appearing hardly at all here in the last 2 weeks or so. We did have this one little surge. That's what corresponded to that flurry of earthquakes right above right here, right? So that's that same day, but that occurs right there. Otherwise, you don't see a whole lot of signals here on the right. You do see that recently it's gotten slightly steeper, slightly flatter, slightly steeper, slightly flatter, but never really climbing in such a way that it looks like it's gonna pop imminently there. So we're still waiting for that breaking point to be reached. It's still swelling and filling and bulging underground there. Here's our SO2 data. Our most recent data point is this one, 135 tons per day on May 3rd. You can see that's within the range of the last month here, where it had as high as 190-ish and as low as about 75-ish or so. Right, and that's just compared to when we have an eruption actually begin, we'd be looking at somewhere in a range of 10,000 tons per day-ish, right? That kind of ballpark order of magnitude. So whatever magma is moving down there and bulging the volcano up, it's not actually registering that highly on the surface. There might be some slightly elevated background levels detected on some of the other signals and ambient monitors, but that's tricky, the ambient monitors, because they depend on wind direction and point sources and all of that kind of stuff as well. So that's why I prefer to look at this integrated SO2 measurement from the USGS that captures all of that, integrates all of that. So this is the whole last month of earthquakes in Kilauea. I showed you guys that last week earlier. So just rewinding a little bit further, so you can see that full pattern of earthquakes, right? And so a lot in the summit region, all through here. That's the main caldera area right in here. We did have that big one that occurred a few weeks ago, just east of the summit. Believing that's adjustment related to the summit as well. And clearly visible on this month-long map is this big tail off to the southwest here, right? It's that seismic southwest rift zone. We've been referring to it as a southwest rift connector down in here. And that area has been active as well too. So potentially there is still injection of magma into that area. This is a zone where we saw an intrusion back in August 2021 that preceded the September 2021 eruption. So it does seem like magma can be stored largely underneath the caldera area, but there does seem to be some kind of offshoot or extension to the south here where the magma has even recently been able to get into. That seems to be what's happening. And we see the south flank, all this earthquakes that are south of the rift zone, showing that the south flank is still moving and adjusting to that building pressure to summit here. The rift zone would be this zone right in there, so that would be more of the rift zone. So pretty quiet right in there. So that whole last month is what we just shown you guys on this 1 year graph. That would be these 4-ish bars here on the right, all amassed together. That's the pattern you see there. And over that same period of 1 year, now we can look at the summit GPS here on Kilauea. So what matters is one station's on the north, one station's on the south. So if the line is getting longer, if it's going up, then the distance is growing. The volcano is swelling and spreading apart. And if it's going down, it's the opposite of that. So it's been swelling for quite a while. It does take this occasional dip, like right in here. That was when the eruption began in January. So it relieves the pressure. It kind of sags a little bit. It's almost like an exhale. It has all that. Magma erupts as lava, and it basically is exhaling and relieving pressure underground. But we're back up to this climbing phase here, right? And you can see that even in the last few weeks, this rate of climbing has been quite a bit higher than the previous time when it was climbing as well. There are other times that are steep as well, and so you can see it can go through this alternating of spreading more, then a little more slowly, then a little more fast. And if we look here at the very far right end of this graph, it's hard to tell, and these data are not always as trustworthy because they haven't quite been cleaned yet to the level they will be later on. But it does appear like it might be flattening out here on this distance measurement north and south across the caldera recently. So that's a curiosity that's worth exploring more. We'll get to that here in a minute. But first, just to mention that the story on the rift zone is the opposite still. This line, north and south across the rift zone at Pu'o'o, is still getting shorter, contracting, the line is going down. Looking at the new ones, you see a lot of wiggling up and down through here, which to me indicates that south flank block has been doing some wiggling and adjusting as a response to that building pressure underneath the summit and south of the summit, as we're seeing there on the earthquakes map. And we do have the tilt meter at Pu'o'o back online. This is that calibration signal when it comes back online right in here. And we look at the scale, this is -4 microradians to +6, so 10 in total. And we're having a deflationary pattern shown on there. It's not a huge volume, so it's almost essentially flat there. But the important thing is it's not doing any steep climbing or anything like that. It's normal adjustment going on there. Right. In comparison, if I scroll back up here to the Kilauea 1 month summit tilt, this one right here, our scale is from +8 to -8. And the line starts -7 to +7, so we're looking at 14 microradians of displacement, of tilt here over the last month, which is considerable. And it's not pre-eruption magnitude, it's not gigantic like that, but it is showing that the thing is bulging pretty good there to be consistently rising, and also to have obscured or disrupted those deflation-inflation signals. That's some interesting things about the signals there. So that's the signals we have to show you guys for the monitoring here overall. I thought we'd take a little bit more of a dive into the actual GPS signals here. And I showed a little bit of a clip that's similar to this on our short update last week that we put out. So this is Kilauea Summit, and I've actually put in the 3-component GPS for the last 2 years at the location where each station is. So this is Uikahuna. This is the crater rim. That is that's the outlet right there. Outlet. And this one down here, I believe, is a Hua. It's okay. This one, Byron's Ledge. So there are 3 components. Let me click one of them. This is Uikahuna, just to blow it up so you can see a little better. The north-south component is this middle panel. Up-down is the bottom panel, and the east-west is this upper panel here. So for example, we can see, this is 2 years now, just to remind you guys. So really what only matters is this very, very far right end of all these plots. But unfortunately, we can't get this in any better resolution than that. So east-west component is actually moving down, so it's moving west. North-south component, it's moving up, so it's moving north and west. And also up-ish, we'll call it over here, right? It looks like the rate of north has increased in the last few weeks as well, too. So north and west and up. And someday I'll get this, so I'll do it automatically. But if I were to draw a vector at Uikahuna here, north and west, that direction, right? So something's swelling over here, and here's Halemaumau. So it would make sense if that's swelling that it push Uikahuna off to the northwest. Right? So if we come all the way down here, let's go down to the outlet. The outlet is going, you can see south pretty well. The east-west line is pretty flat, so not really moving east-west. It's just south and upwards as well. So the outlet, this one down here, if we were to draw a vector, it would go something like that. Also pointing away from Halemaumau right in there. Right? So that's all consistent. The other ones that are interesting are these other summit ones over here. So let's start with, let's go over here, Byron's Ledge. Uealoha is this Hawaiian name. So it's moving to the east, it's moving to the north, and it's moving up as well. All consistent signals. It's hard to show you guys exactly, but this north component seems to be getting pretty steep right over there. That's the steepness of it in this last couple of weeks here. So you could say that it was moving north and east, and it's maybe shifted, moving slightly more north and east in the last few weeks here. So if we were to draw that on here, north and east would be how it was prior, but then more recently it's shifting more to the north, right? So it seems like in that case, it's shifting more to the north, then maybe this inflation center might be moving in that direction to cause it to go from that to this. right? And if that's the case, we should see a signal over here as well at the crater rim. This is the other end of that line across the summit that we measured south to north. This is the south part of it. So it's moving east, it's moving south, and it's moving up still. The up's important. That shows the whole thing is bulging upwards. And it's hard to show you guys here, but the north component is the one that looks like it's actually possibly doing something like this. If we were to zoom it in, it looks like it's coming down, and then there's a tiny little leg here at the bottom. So that may be the signal that's actually showing that seemingly pause and expansion north and south across the crater. So in that case, moving east, and it was moving south, and now it's moving more east and less south, right? So let's draw that on a map. So it was moving east and south. Right? Did I get it right here? Let me open it up, right? So yeah, south and east, and it's moving more south. No, moving more yeah, moving south, east. I'm getting myself confused here. So east, south, and not quite as much south, more east, right? So okay, east and south, and then not quite as much east, but more south as well there. And so it seems like it's almost, in that case, maybe spreading that way. So what you're really seeing is it's hard to tell exactly where the center is really here from this pattern, but it does seem to be variable, maybe shifting or so. And if it is shifting, that would indicate that the pressure is built up and it's actually trying to pressurize other areas and move from here to there. So that would show that it's getting close to erupting as well. And as I showed in a short video, all these signals at the bottom, the very bottom panel going up, all through here, that's all going upwards, up, all the way through, right around in there. And then if we go over to the rift zone, these stations are all going down. That's going down, that's going down, that's going down, that's going down, and otherwise the stations might be wiggling around because of that adjustment to the summit there. So it seems like with a lot of different little movements in here, the significance of that shortening of the this plot right here, and right here, the significance of this flattening doesn't seem like it's so great. So this might clean up just as a cleaning of the data as time goes by, or we might see it actually do some of these wiggles, and it could actually be a precursor to it actually popping as well. So you never know until it actually happens. It's kind of a wait and see thing. We'll wait and see. I thought it'd be interesting since we did have our 5-year anniversary last week of the onset of the 2018 eruption, right? It would have been went on for 3 months, so we're still in that anniversary time. I thought I'd show you guys past 5 years monitoring data to kind of put things in perspective here. So here is the earthquake map for the last 5 years on Kilauea. You can barely see any of the actual map or island on there. You can see there's some ocean off here to the southeast, and there's some island up here to the north. But otherwise, you barely can see anything. And that's how many earthquakes we've had in the last 5 years. Kilauea is super active in the last 5 years. Of course, this includes that summit collapse that occurred in 2018, all through there. And the movement of the south flank with the big earthquakes, and the eruption happened down here in Leilani. So all of that's all embedded in this 5 years, but just to show you how striking that is and how active a volcano we actually have, 5 years of data is that many earthquakes right in there. This count in the top left, 150,818 earthquakes plotted on this map. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, it looks like somebody spilt a bunch of Skittles on it. Like, you can't even see nothing.
Yeah, for sure. This is interesting too. Look at the cross section. You know, not exactly the projection, right? A cross section projection here. Man, all the shallow zone activated. All that intermediate depth also activated. A little bit less so in this kind of green zone in here, right? Underneath Kilauea summit, quite a lot, but less so towards the East Rift Zone. The Pahala earthquakes down in here, that's that big cluster we saw. Yeah, I can clearly see there's a cloud that extends all the way over underneath Kilauea in this 5-year plot, right? So this is some of the evidence that we have sometimes referred to, that Pahala zone actually likely feeds Kilauea this way and then up. Something like that, right? And clearly it's feeding even further over this way as well. Another interesting, really deep earthquake band here in the purples, 40 kilometers down, you can see there's this big cluster underneath Kilauea, but also a secondary grouping that's further off to the east over here. The purples might pop up here. That's the group offshore, off the south flank, and not quite clear exactly if that's some also path of magma movement or what else is going on in there, but it's also evident. And this is a cool picture because it really shows you all the different things the volcano can do, since the volcano's done pretty much everything it can in the last 5 years. So that's a fully integrated plot, and I thought this would be a good time to touch base on that. Earthquake rates. So the collapse of Kilauea caldera, you can see here there was 1 month showing 24,000 earthquakes. Another month before that was 20,000 earthquakes. Before that, it was actually somewhere around 6,000 earthquakes. Everything since then has been pretty piddly. And this is all the earthquakes since then. This does include all the eruptions at the summit. So you can see this background right there is that elevated pre-eruption in December 2020. Right there was when it actually re-emerged as lava as the first time. Let's zoom that in a little bit. So right there, that's the elevated background right there. When it erupts, it pops down to that eruptive background right through there. That eruption lasted about that long. It was 3 months-ish, 3-4 months-ish right through there. And you can see then the activity picks back up until about September. September occurs, it drops back down right through there. Stays fairly low in that during eruption times until right before December 2022 when it starts closing off once again. Earthquake levels come back up. Then it erupts in January, drops back down. And you can see now it's coming back up a little bit too. It's not quite as dramatic, these bars, because they're all squished down given the scale was accommodating this massive collapse back in 2018. But come a couple months from now, all this will scroll off the side of the map and it'll all be in the archive, but not showing on these 5-year plots. And all this stuff will get scaled a little easier and we'll be able to compare a little better. Still, it's worth looking at this point in time as we're right in that build up towards an eruption and curious how that compares to the previous ones. It does fit the pattern essentially there. So, and depth time, that's just a bunch of ink on there. Not really worth going into that too much more. But scrolling down to the GPS for the last 5 years, there is a massive drop from the collapse of the caldera and the contraction, right? The contraction north to south. And then it starts spreading again as it recovers. There is a December 2020 when it erupts for that first time, that little dip down right there. And you can see that even after the eruption starts and is still going on, lava coming out of the ground, it actually starts spreading again. The same thing happens in September 2021. And the same thing happens here in January 2023. And here we are in that pattern, right? We still haven't quite come back to that full loss that we experienced from 5 years ago, right? You can see that we've recovered quite a bit of that gain, right? But not quite all the way there. Still missing some to do it. And at the rate that we've been climbing, it would probably be a couple more years to get back to that. At Pu'u'o, the story is a little more interesting. You can see there is that similar contraction going across as magma was evacuating an area down towards Leilani. And then when eruption was over, it did show signs of rebound, and there was this era of time where we were wondering if perhaps that deep rift was feeding magma up into that rift zone, because it did seem to be refilling to some degree, but it wasn't showing signs of pressurizing to the point it could erupt. And in fact, come December 2020, when we saw that first summit eruption, the magma was inferred to have backflowed from the rift zone towards the summit once again. And so ever since the summit began erupting back in December 2020, it's been a relief for the rift zone, and the rift zones kept contracting fairly steadily that entire time, right? You can see the little wiggles of the eruptions in here as well, but not as dramatically as you see at the summit. So that's the overall pattern, is that if it was still doing this kind of thing still today, if it had done this and then kept going, then we'd be more worried about it rift zone reactivation sooner than later. But because it's doing this big swing downwards, it's a later than sooner kind of deal. So that just kind of hopefully ties it all together and gives you a little more context within the last 5 years to make it relevant to what we discussed last week with our panel of community members. And that is all of our monitoring signals here. So turning to our main hazard, which is the gas on Kilauea. Here's our volcanic hazard summary with the gas. Here's our VOG mapping project forecast for the next couple of days here. Kilauea is our emission source at this triangle right in here. That orange cloud that comes out, that's where the VOG is dispersing. Locally around Kilauea summit, seems to go over Mauna Loa's northeast rift, which is fairly uninhabited. It might cross into the saddle towards Loa as well, a little bit there too at the end. Occasionally we do see this drift down into Pahala. That could happen over the next week as well, past this 2-day forecast. But overall, it's more localized than when eruption actually begins. And so if eruption, or when eruption does begin, the values will spike much higher, and you'll see an effect that might wrap all the way around the Kona side and possibly offshore and depending on the volume to other islands, as we saw back in 2018. But right now, fairly localized to Kilauea. And if we bring up our purple air citizen science community monitors, everything's in the green here, as consistent with that forecast we just saw and with the low emission rates from Kilauea. In a national park, everything has been in the green, but this is that site that's the most localized to the gas vents. So if it shows up anywhere, it often shows up here, but in the last couple of days, everything's been in the green here, as we can see on these charts. Okay, so now we'll go to some visuals and some practice of kilo, which is observation. So Kilauea observations here. This is, let's get this be current and play you guys the live stream in USGS HVO looking at the Halemaumau crater, which has no lava at present, but you can see the fume coming out from that eastern crater wall, from this west vent pond area, basin, right? The actual west vent complex itself. And that old north vent or old west vent complex, the one we've been calling 1.0, it was back from December 2020, also seems to be fuming quite a lot. All around the edge of the crater, you can see that some more of that as well. So remember, underneath all this inner circle, oval right here in the foreground, is all liquid magma with relatively thin crust. I mean, thin, you know, because the magma in that area, we know that the bottom of the collapsed crater was 1,600 feet down. And so the crust might be tens or, you know, several tens of feet thick, but compared to that 1,600 feet, it's really fairly thin or so. So that is the current live view in here. We do have some footage from the USGS. They did an overflight on May 3rd on the anniversary date. And I'm going to play this at 2 speeds so we can see all the views. First, this wide angle view of the steam in Halemaumau. North would be about this way-ish. Now a little bit closer in. So there's our central island. That's the west vent basin from that first eruption in the west. This area in here is the lava basin from January 2023. And that's where the lava had ponded, actually, this whole area all the way down to here, and then receded back into the smaller area before it drained away at the start of March there. And from there, we actually have visible the central vent. When that 2023 eruption began, it actually started, well, here we are, I guess we reversed our view, but there's that central vent once again. There's that eastern pond. It actually began from the central vent here. There were fountains here and all the way down to here. Eventually it seemed to focus on the fountains within that lake. And towards the end of that eruption, late February, early March, it shifted back towards the center and built up this feature now. So it looks like a little cone in there, actually, if I possibly can zoom it in a little bit there. A little bit of a cone with that feeder channel out that went around and poured into that lake towards the end phase right over there. So that's what Kilauea looks like today, and what would look like from an aerial flight last week. Here comes the basins, and yeah, there's the end of that video. So from that, they also did a thermal scan, and here's our most recent thermal maps from Kilauea. Everything is bluish, which is showing that it's all solid lava with nothing red, red hot, which would show up here as these brighter yellows and sometimes oranges and reds as well. So the little yellow spots are where you can see heat coming out from these cracks all around the perimeter of the crater here, but also the one bright spot in there, that's that west vent pond area, which has been the bright spot for the last 2 months or so, since eruption ended. So everything is fairly quiet there at the surface, but as we just showed you guys, still bulging and pressurizing underground. That's the inner crater view. If you zoom it out within the main caldera, that's that area of the lava lake right in there, compared to that larger caldera collapse zone all through here. So also released, we have some images of the seismic imaging project, right? So that's when they've been deploying all these extra seismic nodes, 1,800 of them. Here is an image of some being deployed in a bucket, and notes, measurements, GPS, all that is what's required to then go and collect these things and collect the data and integrate them all into the data set. They do note if anyone does see this instrumentation out in Kilauea, and we've heard that they're every 100 yards or so across areas, certain areas. Please do not touch or disturb it, as that will corrupt the data that's being collected. And they have to basically stay in the same orientation the entire time. So there's one. Here's another example. This is a spiked seismic node, and a tool to deploy it in Hili and Pali area. They use a compass to orient the node so it faces north. Then they document the location on GPS so that crews can find out when it's complete. And they also take detailed notes to ensure all the information they need for each node is collected here, right? So you can see all kinds of barcodes and serial numbers and stuff like that. It would be stuff to collect as well, you'd imagine. Right, and then we have the actual vibro-sized truck has arrived on island and is actually deployed right now, conducting its survey. And we'll get to that here in a second. I'll show you guys this video here in a second, but just to show you guys one other related to the micronodes here is a Twitter post by the USGS showing another installation of these. Right? We talked about how there was a battery component attached to the actual instrument and how it's going to have contact with the ground. We'll often put a sandbag on top to keep it well connected to the ground. But just to note how big a project this actually is to install this nearly 2,000 small temporary nodes. This is from Cascades Volcano Observatory. Cascades volcanoes are normal levels of activity this past week, and CVO field teams finally get to take off snow boots. They're in Hawaii this week, helping to deploy the small seismic nodes as part of the seismic imaging project. So just some more verification that we had that extra crew from the mainland was coming out to help take care of this massive project here. This really could be quite revolutionary for the science of Kilauea, right? This has never been done in this level of detail before. All the questions and the hand waving we often do because we just don't know what it looks like down there has the potential to be answered by this study, which it'll probably be years before we see the final results, but still awesome to see it actually being done, requiring all this collaboration between all these different agencies to make it actually happen. So the vibro-sized truck, here it is. There is sound to this. I'm trying to turn it down a bit because it's the sound of a truck running. How's that? Is it too loud? So there's a truck. You can see it's got big wheels there. It lowers that central portion. It essentially lifts the wheels off the ground slightly right there. Right? And you see this inner part. There's a piston that thing is rising up. And it looks like it hydraulically then drops down. And then it also wiggles and shakes around a bit too. So the videographer is not using a tripod here, so there's a little bit of camera shake as well. But if we keep our eye here in the central section, I think it's pressurizing here. We'll actually see it wiggle a bit at some point. See, the wheels don't come... It looks like they actually might come off the ground a little bit fully right there, but it's hard to see from this angle exactly what happens there. So let's see here. It looks like that thing is wiggling right there in the middle now. It's doing some bouncing up and down right there. Then we get a different view. Notice how this big pad on the bottom, it's got a piece of plywood, I think, down there, so it can make good contact and not damage the road or anything it's actually sitting on. There it is, shaking one more time again. You see that all the cables wiggling around in there. Right, so it's not actually like pounding the ground and pounding the asphalt. It's actually putting a pad on the ground and then wiggling it, putting shock waves, energy waves through it, and get contact with the ground as well. And that's what's moving through the ground, getting picked up by all these instruments. And since they know where the truck is at every point in time, they can then say, okay, the pathway from that energy source to our receiver had to go through this bit of rock, and the rock is showing these properties. And that's why it takes so long to integrate that much data to get that final result there. But it's going to be massively important for Kilauea. Looking at the page for disaster funding here for this Imaging Kilauea Summit project. Here is a timeline, which essentially goes mid-April to early May. They've deployed all the nodes already. And May 9th through 13th, the vibro-sized truck has begun operating. So from 2 days ago until 2 days from now, it'll be on Mauna Loa Road. Let's see if I can get this a little bigger for you guys there. All right. What's going on there? Okay, 9th through 13th. Mauna Loa Road, tree modes, Mauna Drive, and Volcano Golf Course. Portion of Crater Rim Drive from Hawaii Volcanoes National Park entrance through Kilauea Visitor Center. And a National Park Service housing area. That's the area behind Volcano House. Between Volcano House and that backcountry permit office through there. The following week, 15th to the 20th, they're going to go on Highway 11 west of Peak Mountain Drive. So this is in the Ka'u Desert area between golf course and that western entrance in Ka'u. Portions of Critter Rim Drive between Kilauea Military Camp and Uakahuna Bluff. So that's between that former Jaguar Museum area and KMC area there. North of Nahuku, also known as Thurston Lava Tube, and between Nahuku and the West of Devastation Trail area. So that's most of the Critter Rim Drive area surrounding the caldera there. Then the following week, they go on Idaho Road to Mauna Ulu, including portions of Chinook Critter Road, portion of Escape Road south of Nahuku to Mauna Ulu, and then downhill on Napali Road, Chinook Critters Road as well, and you can see all the way to the end of the month, 29th to 31st, Critter Rim Drive south of the entrance station to the area north of the Visitor Center. Old Volcano Road, Haunani Road in Volcano Village, and Wright Road as well. So early June, they'll go back and collect all those different instruments, and then all the data crunching begins there. That's a little bit of a timeline I thought I'd throw in here while we're talking about the vibro size. That's something that if you're in the area, you might get to see. However, this truck is driving really slow and taking a lot of stops, right? So if you see it, you may be seeing it for a little while until you can get around it or get past it in some way. I'm not sure how that's all going down out there. Still pretty cool. And if you do have footage of this, if you are seeing it around, feel free to send it in to us. We'd definitely appreciate seeing that. So that is their imagery for this week. There is still no lava to view, so we'll skip our lava viewing segment this week as well. Just keep in mind that if eruption does occur, that within that first 24 to 48 hours is the best viewing, so that's why everyone rushes up there to try to see the best view as soon as possible. That's when the most lava is coming out of the ground, and you often get the biggest fountains, the biggest extent of lava on the crater floor, all that kind of stuff, depending actually if it does come out in the crater floor or not. So yeah, that's the observations we have here, and with that we can turn to Mauna Loa. So let's pull up our Mauna Loa monitoring here. And there's not been a lot happening in Mauna Loa. I showed you guys this 5-year earthquake plot. Well, I'm going to show you guys the 1-year earthquake plot right here. For 5 years, you can see what it looks like. Here's our low levels compared to the build up to eruption in 2022. And the previous 5 years actually had quite a lot more activity than we're seeing now as well. So Mauna Loa is really very quiet, the quietest it's been in 5 years here at the bottom. Here it is for the last month, earthquakes per day. The maximum number of earthquakes in the last week has been 8 in that area. So really not many at all. Tilt-wise, it does seem to still be inflating. Sometimes a little faster, sometimes a little slower. And that's all consistent with the USGS update. Here's our monthly update for Mauna Loa that came out, what day was this? May 4th last week on Thursday. That's part of all the other volcanoes that updated monthly, Waialae, Mauna Kea, all the others as well. But the long and short of it is no activity at Mauna Loa was significant in the past month. The number of earthquakes remains at background levels, and most events smaller than magnitude 2. The largest was a magnitude 3 on April 2nd, northwest of Ve'oveo. Data from GPS instruments Mauna Loa indicate slow inflation as magma replenishes the summit reservoir system. That's the most important sentence there. That's what's going on. Magma is replenishing the shallow system. That's normal. That's what happens after eruptions just about every time that we've had instruments on the ground there. Otherwise, everything is quiet. No anomalous gas or temperature readings either. So that is really all of Mauna Loa. And we'll move on to our volcano watches, which we broadcast last week on Wednesday. Volcano Watch comes out on Thursday, so we missed last week's output. It was posted on hawaiitracker.com, where you can find this article if you want to read it in more detail. But last week's, was a reflection on 5 years since 2018 as well. And more related on what the USGS is doing, they had to actually move out of their offices in National Park and down to Hilo. So 5 years since that happened as well. And yeah, without going into that whole recap of 5 years of the USGS, things like using drones now to conduct surveys. Interesting stuff there, but we'll leave it to you to read the details if you're interested in more and following up on that. But otherwise, that is up on hawaiitracker.com, as is this week's article, which is Explosive Eruptions from Mount Ma'u in 1924. So May of 2023 marks the 99-year anniversary of those explosive eruptions. with fragments ranging from volcanic ash to large blocks the size of cars falling around the summit caldera. Right? There's actually one fatality. There was a photographer from Pahala area. Right? At the time, you can see this is a famous image by Tai Sing Lu of that wedding party up at the rim of Kilauea, near Volcano House area, looking at this massive eruption column rising to their west behind him over there. It's a photographer was actually down on his own in the ground. Looked something like that, but kind of around a corner behind these people back in there. So right in the middle of all that mess was the impact zone, which proved fatal. Otherwise, you can read this on HawaiiTracker.com as well. There's not anything that's super relevant to what's happening here today, but it's interesting to note the events. 60 different explosions over that month-long period or so, right? And then draining at a lava lake, and draining at a lava lake is what actually preceded the explosions, along with an intrusion down all the way to Kapoho with movement of the ground along the south flank. There's famous images, are not in this article, of railroad tracks in Kapoho displaced, hanging off the edge of this fault offset. Right, actually, we have railroad lines suspended in the air. So big impact. There was no eruption at that point in time, but it is suspected that magma must have moved through the rift zone offshore, off Cape Kumukahi, east of Hawaii Island, and at least intruded down there, if not erupted. That distinction is not clear. So those are our volcano watches last week and this week. And the last thing to mention to you guys is our community calendar here. So turning to our community corner, the big event this week is coming up in 2 days here in Pahoa town. Activate Puna Block Party and Benefit Concert, May 13th. Let's see if I can get this date to actually show on the screen for you guys here. Well, maybe not, but it's May 13th. It's coming Saturday downtown Pahoa. And here is the schedule. It begins at 4 p.m. And you can see there's live music. There's all kinds of vendors, including food, going all the way to Opal. You can see that headliner is Anuhea, 10:15 p.m. Before them, 9:15, Natural Vibrations. Before them, Nicole Spindle Star's Fire Showcase. Before them, Aipohaku. And also in that is going to be a video that Dane prepared about that anniversary. You want to talk about that, Dane, a little bit?
Yeah, and just it's a video about how far we've come since 2018, right? And to do that, we have to look for where we were, 5 years ago, and some of the growth that's happened since then. I'm not exactly sure when this thing's going to go, but it features Drew Daniels' music, who's also going to be performing. Features photography by Andrew Hara, David Corrigan, Ken Boyer, a whole bunch of big names that were around in the eruption. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. Short video, so hoping to make some impact and keep some eyes drawn to it. We'll be, I think, premiering it here on the Hawaii Tracker and Hawaii Pod after it premieres at the event. So sometime tomorrow, maybe Friday, or sometime Saturday, maybe Sunday, it'll come out.
Awesome. And anything else about the event that you want to share, or is that did I cover it well enough?
Yeah, I think you did a good job covering it. It's just a great little block party. It lasts for hours, so if you're working when it starts, come by later that night. There is tickets at this one, as compared to the other ones. I think it's $30 at the door, $25 if you go to activate Puna and reserve a ticket now. But yeah, they're going to have all kinds of vendors, food. There's a beer garden, all that kind of stuff there. So it's good times. Drug-free event. Try and keep it Pono and all that. It's great to see all Pahoa kind of come together on this. And this started after the 2018 eruption was the first one we did. So coming back around, still a lot of the same faces doing this thing.
Yeah, actually, the first one, the sky was still red, wasn't it? It wasn't called Activate Puna at that point in time, but it was a block party, right? It was a July 2018. It was sky was red, and that was quite an event for the people. That's the spirit in which this continues here. And
Right.
yeah, for 21 and over, there is a beer garden. Remember reading that. So yeah, that's the Activate Puna schedule for this coming Saturday, 2 days from now. I don't have a whole lot else on our community calendar. There is a new video from the National Park Service and their Ikehana No'eal Experience the Skillful Work series. This one is Ohivai, collecting water. So when we discuss this more in future broadcasts here, but just to point that out, that is out there too, and that will be something we're going to post as well on our Facebook group and website too. Right. So
Yep.
that is our program for today.
Yep, and next week, programming note, I believe we're going to be going again on Wednesday, not Thursday, one more time. Sorry for the scheduled ping pong going on, but we have some conflict, some double scheduling things going on, so we just got to move around them. And yeah, hope you guys will be there on Wednesday. We'll be coming back unless something happens, right? Kilauea decides to pop off. We might go live, over the weekend or whenever if it does something like that, but play it by ear. It's been, in this high unrest state where it's still able to not erupt. So we need to see if it breaks out of that pattern.
Yeah, for sure. So time for some thank yous.
Yeah. Be able to keep the show going, really. Like, share, subscribes, all that stuff really does help with the algorithm, and that's really what it's all about on these social media platforms. So when you hear people talk about that all the time, asking for the shares and the likes, that's why. It does help. We also like to thank County of Hawaii for helping us with the Bye Bye Grant program for this past year and the content that we were able to produce during that whole process. So appreciate that support there. And we're going to have to continue going forward, potentially coming up with different ways to do this. And we had a couple super chats come through. Want to acknowledge those as well. One was Scott Hartman, a $10 donation, just said thank you. We had one from Skagit Ed, who said thanks for sharing that overflight, Phil, and your effort as well. And then I said it wrong again. It's Skagit Ed. I get it wrong every time. I apologize for that.
Ed, our friend Ed.
Yeah, Ed. Good guy, Ed. All right. I think that does it for that part. We did have a few questions if you want to take those up. First one was from Carl, and it says, does the stress of inflation and deflation weaken the crust?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely it could, right? But I think there's different scales of inflation and deflation, right? So like, if we compare anything that's happening now to what happened in 2018, then the answer for now is kind of barely, right? Most of the cracks that we have are from that, depending on how you count them, 60,000 or 90,000 earthquakes we had in the 3 months of the summer of 2018. That really cracked it all up to all levels down there, right? But when you see an earthquake, that's some piece of rock breaking, and it's breaking because of stress underground, right? Building pressure. So when you see an earthquake, that is showing that it's actually weakening the crust by causing a break there, right? So that's really the thing. Then if it breaks enough, then it can make its way towards the surface through that new opening, and that's when you get your eruption. So yeah, absolutely, it does weaken the crust, but to different levels, to different extents depending on the magnitude of that, right? So lava rock isn't the most it's fairly brittle already, right? And lots of cracks and airspace, vesicles, things like that, that can help it not be very coherent. So yeah, it doesn't necessarily take a whole lot to cause those little earthquakes. And I'd say as a whole, it probably doesn't weaken it like in bulk. It probably weakens it locally in areas here or there where those earthquakes are actually occurring, right? But as a whole volcano, it's not like it's going to change the nature of it, and it's not going to cause it to erupt in some new dramatic way, anything like that. It's just the normal process of it actually cracking its way through the rocks towards the surface or through the networks underground to find more space. Hopefully that's a intro to that discussion right there.
Yeah, we had a question come through. Two Pineapples. If you don't follow them, they do streaming on the volcano as well. We partner with them often, Yeah, they ask, where is the best location online to report SO2 and earthquakes? Now, the SO2, I'm not so sure about. To get reports, we have spots, but to make reports, it's a different thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure that there is SO2 report.
We had something going during Mauna Loa, but still haven't done anything with that really. Need to try and get that ball rolling again. But yeah, the earthquakes you can report when you feel one. There's on the USGS map, the earthquake map. You can follow through, click on the earthquake, follow through, and it's called did you feel it or felt it, things along those lines, and you can make a report for an individual earthquake, tag your location, and it actually helps USGS refine the earthquake data and the locations and all that kind of stuff.
Right. So that's usually on a per earthquake basis. So there's a general page, but then you got to find your earthquake from the list. That's right. A lot harder than actually finding the earthquake first. Click on the earthquake first, and then click on did you feel it? And unfortunately, it's a case-by-case basis. More generally, there is the Ask HVO at usgs.gov, where they do take inquiries. So if there was a SO2 inquiry or report to be made, you could try them, and worst case, they'll redirect you somewhere else if there is somewhere else to redirect you.
Right.
The thing with SO2 that makes those reports a little less useful than things like earthquakes is like it's really dependent on the wind direction. It's really depending on the person, their sensitivity to the gas, whether they can detect it or not, for how long, what their physical reaction is to the gas and all of that. So you can't just take one person who's having a bad reaction and say, okay, that must be really bad, because you're excluding that variable of different people reacting different ways to it, right? So that's a tricky part of it over there. Yeah, for sure.
Right.
Yeah, mahalo,
right.
Mauna. Appreciate you guys.
And final question, Andrew asks, is there a public data feed somewhere that would show harmonic tremor? How would that show up on a seismograph? Or is there a different instrument that would show it better when it starts up?
Yeah, so there are seismographs that are put online from the USGS. So if you go to the main USGS Hawaiian Volcano Observatory page, and I've pulled this up in the past, and it froze our stream, so I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to show you how to do it because I can't. It doesn't play well with our system here. But go to the main USGS page, and at the very top there's a map. Right, you can click on the settings to go into the map and show the locations where there are seismographs. And I believe there are triangles on that map. And when you do that, you can click on each triangle, and it'll pop up an option where you can see the last 6 hours, or 12 hours, or 24 hours, or 48 hours. The actual wiggles on the ground, right? But that's just an absolute ground motion sensor. We do have spectrograms now as well. I believe Two Pineapples has those up on their 24/7 live stream. There are other live streams that put that up as well. It is a little bit less stable, it seems like, right? It's a little tricky to get that to stay online all the time. That is being produced by the Swarm software, which is actually tapping a USGS feed directly. So another option is you actually can run that on your computer locally if you like, with an internet connection, if you download the software and install it and all of that. Right, so that may or may not be something that you can do, Andrew, but that is an option. If you're really, really into it, you can actually keep it running on your computer all the time, and it'll pull data off the internet. So right. Yeah, on the actual blue line seismograph, you actually would just look for like a kind of fatter band. Like there's like a the thing scrolls every 15 minutes, so like the lines are kind of like one thin pixel, what have you. But if it's tremoring, you actually see it wiggling consistently all the way across, as opposed to an earthquake, which would be a big jolt and then back to the wiggling, and another big jolt and back to the wiggling. It's the background, the wiggling, the thickness of that line is the tremor there. And on a spectrogram, that's something that's a little more complicated, but you actually can see across the different frequencies all the way up. It's somewhat like vertical lines, right? When you have distinct earthquakes that cross all the spectrum, you can have like longer period events that only activate the lower part of the spectrum there, a frequency spectrum. But you can also detect tremor signals on there as well if you're studying it enough. That's the best I can do without pulling it all up and trying to show you. And that, like as I said, that probably messed up the screen here. So hopefully that works well enough. And feel free to message us if that's not quite clear enough, Andrew. I appreciate your question.
All right. Well, I think that gets us through questions today. Again, unless something happens, we will be back Wednesday with our another weekly update. And if something does happen, we'll probably go live and try and cover at least for a little bit. I think that does it for me. If make sure if you want to do something Saturday and don't have any plans, the Activate Pahoa is there.
Yeah, some awesome bands, awesome music, and contributors, community members all pitching in to help there. So yeah, I encourage you guys to attend if you can. And yeah, otherwise we'll see you guys on Wednesday, right? Once again, Wednesday, not Thursday next week, 5 p.m. Hawaiian time, same time as usual. Until then, unless she pops sooner than that, from HawaiiTracker.com, he's Dane DuPont. I'm Philip Ong.